What's up everybody, Matt Moran here for another car review. This is of course the 2011 Cadillac CT-SV Coupe. Huge thanks to Dakota for providing me with his very sweet CT-SV Coupe to review for you guys today. So about the CT-SV Coupe, well, several years ago, about 6 years ago, I did the sedan version of this second gen CT-SV, and they're a lot of fun. They weren't perfect, but they were very, very good for what they were. And so the Coupe is one that I've never done. This is also a manual, which is a version that I haven't ever driven. And so for the coupes here, I think that they actually have aged a little bit better than the sedans, honestly. And I remember when these first came out, especially in black here, it just looked like a Batmobile or something. It was just so bold and aggressive, you know, and I do like how it was an evolutionary design change over the first gen CT-SV. You still had vertically oriented headlights there. You have the nice bold mesh grille that all these Vs had back then, and still just a very nice bold front fascia as well. You got the chrome wheels here on the sides that look fantastic here. Going down to the sides there, again, it's really, they exaggerated the wedge shape. The coupes are a little bit taller than even the sedan because it kind of comes up to a higher point there in the roof and then drops off there for the back. And it's a very dramatic look. And whether you're looking at it in photos or video or in person, it really is bold. And that whole back end really stands out more than just about any other coupe on the road, I think, personally. They also just had some really cool design cues out back. Of course, the very traditional vertical tail lamps that Cadillac still had back here for the 2011 model year. And I also love that third brake light, which looks kind of like a spoiler, and also to me looks like a little bit of a throwback to some of the, you know, late 50s and early 60s Cadillacs with their taillight fins and things like that. And I kind of like how that comes to a point. It's a very cool, unique design thing. Again, you know, Cadillac wasn't trying to blend in. They were trying to stand out and be bold, and I really respect the designers of this car for doing that. Otherwise, you have the center mounted exhaust tips there that are pretty large in the lower part of the rear bumper. The staggered wheel setup, everything about this vehicle just looks so muscular, so aggressive, and I think it just looks fantastic. As for the interior of the 2011 CT-SV Coupe, well, it's a very cool place to be. So anyway, first thing, sitting down in these seats. Now this one has the optional Recaro seats, and you can get standard seats, or you could back then, but this one has the Recaro option, and they're very cool seats. They actually have, you know, some Alcantara here on the insert, and then you also have inflatable bolsters, which is very cool. So, you know, this was around the time that, you know, manufacturers started introducing these adjustable bolstering setups, and it's a very effective setup. So it's an inflatable bolster, so it's not quite as quick as the newer stuff, but does a really good job of, you know, making it still nice and tight or as wide as you'd like. And so that's really nice. They also have very adjustable lumbar, and they were a little bit on the firm side. And I remember when I did the sedan several years back, I complained about how firm those seats are. These ones seem to be a little bit softer, so maybe that was just, you know, that one was only 1 year old at the time. This one, you know, now being you know, basically about 8 years old or so, you know, I think that probably has helped these seats to get a little softer. I think they're kind of broken in a little bit better now. So that probably helps. They're still not the most comfortable seats though, in my opinion. If you're looking to buy one of these, definitely sit in one with the Recaro seats and one without to make sure the Recaro seats are something you actually do want. But I do like the adjustable bolstering. That's great. Next is the steering wheel here, which is wrapped in Alcantara in this one. Now that is another option. I'm personally not in love with Alcantara steering wheels just because they don't age great. And even though the owner of this one has, you know, been religiously taking care of this steering wheel, and he actually maintains it pretty frequently, you can see it still gets a little matted down. It's not as fuzzy as it used to be, but it still does look good. You know, it's a very cool look to it. So just, again, comes down to personal preference. But the wheel itself has a great 9-3 grip, nice little 10-2 notches, and I do love the button setup on here. You just have your basic audio stuff on the right, but the left-hand side, they actually put the traction control off button on the steering wheel, which I thought was really funny whenever I first encountered that, you know, several years ago. And that's awesome that you have that. That's also how you go into competition mode, by hitting that twice. Gauges are also nice and simple here in the CT-SV. So I just love the large analog dials, and you know, it goes up to 200 for the speedometer there. You actually have a boost gauge there for the supercharger, which is great to have because that's not always a given in a lot of other supercharged vehicles. And I love also how you have the red lights that follow the tach there. And you also have a few things. Again, now this vehicle was about 8 years old, so back then they didn't have super advanced displays, but you did have a little G meter there where the odometer would be. And you also do have the option of having a digital speedometer, which is nice, and that's about it. You know, tire pressures, things like that, but no other performance metrics really in there, but all the stuff you need and want you have, you know, like that boost gauge and stuff. And so overall, you know, still a really great and nicely simplified gauge setup. Coming over to the center of the dashboard here. So first thing you'll see is this pop-up screen, and it's kind of cool, you know, how it does pop up, so you can lower it if you don't want to have the screen there in your face, and that is a nice thing that I wish actually some new cars these days actually had as an option. But anyway, the screen is, you know, pretty good resolution. Even these days it, you know, holds up pretty well. Obviously you don't have any smartphone integration or anything, but you do actually have a USB jack and an auxiliary jack here in the center armrest, so you can still hook up, you know, some modern stuff in here. It's not that old or anything. And I also do appreciate that this screen is touchscreen. You do also have this little menu selector that you can scroll through to, you know, do that kind of stuff if you don't want to touch the screen, but nice to have the option. I'm glad they gave people that option. That was a very well thought out thing, considering many of the competitors at the time still force you to use controllers, and I think this has aged better because it's a touchscreen, which is what most companies are now going to here 8 years later. You also have a volume and tune knob, which is great. Also, speaking of audio stuff, this one also has a Bose stereo. I believe that was something that was pretty widespread here in the CTS-Vs, if not standard, and so it gives you a little bit of a better sound. Otherwise, you do have a fair assortment of buttons here, but nothing too overwhelming. I do like how they nicely separated out your climate controls and the heated and ventilated seat controls here off to the sides, and you also even have a little button there for your magnetic ride control suspension and stuff. So not too many buttons, just, you know, you have to kind of familiarize yourself with it a little bit. And then beneath that, you'll see a little, basically a ashtray size space there with a power outlet. Other storage stuff, you have two cup holders here behind the shifter. Like I mentioned, you have the center armrest, which is kind of firm. That would be nicer if it was a little bit softer. But anyway, you can open that up here. It's two tiers. The first top tier here, you know, you can fit like a phone or something, you know, thin in there, and a pen. And then the bottom portion here isn't too deep, but does have, you know, some cutouts there, so you have a decent amount of space. And there's also pockets here in the doors that are pretty deep actually, but they're not wide enough for a bottle or anything. Backseat space in the CTS-V Coupe. Now obviously they have the CTS-V sedan, so if you're going to use a backseat, even fairly often, I would definitely recommend getting the sedan instead. But as far as coupes go, the CTS-V Coupe here is okay for its size. It's a little tricky to get in and out of the back seat because you don't really have any way to move that seatbelt out of the way, and the opening isn't super wide there. But once you are back there, I'm 5'9", me sitting behind myself. I have about an inch of legroom to spare, so I do fit back there comfortably. The only thing is headroom is a little tight. Again, being 5'9", I'm basically at the limit of how big you can comfortably be to fit back there. My hair is like grazing that rear glass. So, you know, if you're any taller, you're not gonna be able to fit back there. But, you know, I still a fairly usable back seat, again, for the size. And there's also two cup holders back there. You also have your own air vents and another little pop-out tray with another power outlet and a little cubby in there. Trunk space in the CTS-V Coupe is actually pretty good for a coupe as well. So it's a pretty nice long space, a very wide space, and fairly deep as well. So, I mean, a pretty nice large trunk. And I think part of, you know, this very interesting back-end design of the CTS-V Coupe is that it gives you that very large trunk. If it was a little sleeker or something, I think you would have a lot less space. So I think as far as practicality goes, you do have a good amount of space back there, and the rear seats do fold flat. So if you need to have a longer space, you can fold those seats, and that's how you'll fit golf clubs and things like that in, according to Cadillac. And so nice to have that versatility as well. So, you know, it's fairly practical as well for a, you know, sporty coupe of this nature. All right, so start them and go for a drive. The CTS-V has this very slim key, a very cool key. I like it a lot. But of course, it's keyless access, keyless entry, and push button start. So you just leave the key in your pocket. There's this little key fob type thing. You put the clutch in, twist that, and it roars to life. All right, so setting off here in the 2011 Cadillac CTS-V Coupe. So the first thing you might hear is that this one has a muffler delete. It's the only modification really done to this vehicle, aside from the tires being a slightly different brand. But this exhaust, it's got these nice little crackles and pops. You just heard that one whenever you let off the gas, and it sounds really good. And then you have that combined with the supercharger whine that is muted. I remember it being louder in the other CTS-V that I reviewed, but it's still sounds good. Other things though here at some lower speeds is that it's a pretty nice, smooth, comfortable ride. So it has magnetic ride control. There's those crackles. And the magnetic ride control does a really good job. It starts off in touring mode automatically. There's also a sport mode, and that firms things up nicely. But in the touring mode here, it is really pretty soft and comfortable. Now, it's not sloppy or anything. It's just compliant, and it just feels good. Very appropriate for, you know, a sporty, you know, newer Cadillac. But it still gives you a nice amount of firmness that, you know, you don't need to go into sport mode, I don't think, but if you do want to do sport mode, it just gives you a little bit of a flatter feel as well. But we're even going around some gentle corners now in touring mode, and it feels good. The only thing I will say is that the steering is a little quicker and just like a little light and imprecise, I think, is kind of the what I'm feeling here. So on center, it just doesn't feel super buttoned down, but that's the only thing I can say. Otherwise, everything else feels really good. You have nice, strong brake feel here. You start getting some nice bite from the brakes right as soon as you lean into them. Throttle response is also great. Shifter is also very easy to use. You know, you have a pretty light clutch pedal. It's very predictable and easy to get the hang of, and the shifter has a little bit of a longer throw here, you know, being stock and everything, but still actually feels really good. It's pretty precise, and I like the longer throw, actually. I think it feels pretty good. Got some very hilly roads here, and this suspension, even in touring mode, though, it stays nice and planted. It also probably helps as far as ride comfort that these are pretty heavy. They weigh around 4,200 pounds, which is about 200 pounds heavier than like my Mustang GT, for example. You do have that supercharger and stuff, so that adds some weight, and also the luxury features here of the Cadillac. But, you know, it's heavy. You know, it's about, you know, pretty close in weight to like a Dodge Challenger Hellcat, while having much smaller dimensions than that Challenger does. So that's kind of an interesting thing to notice. You know, it was on the heavier side, but they did a good job with magnetic ride control and stuff to kind of keep that weight at bay, you know, at least from what I can tell so far here. But I'll certainly be driving more to, you know, see how that feels as time goes on. But yeah, everything is just, everything's very natural and very predictable. Everything is set up the way you would expect it to be set up, I think. This just all feels very agile, I guess. You know, it doesn't feel like it's 4,200 pounds on it. It's like a Challenger, you're in a Challenger and it feels like you're in a big heavy car in a lot of ways. And those still handle better now with the wide body kit, but this actually feels lighter than the numbers suggest, in my opinion at least, and feels really nice and sharp. Especially the steering is really quick. Like I said, it could use a little bit more resistance in my opinion, but I do like how quick it is because it really makes this car feel eager to change direction. These brakes also feel great. You know, like I said, the pedal is also very immediate, but not just the pedal, but also the braking ability you have here. You have Brembos that are 6-piston in the front, 4-piston in the rear. All right, so let's turn down onto this back road here and see how it does. Here we go. Lots of wheel spin. Second gear pulls hard though. It grabs in second. Great. Wow, that's exciting. Oh man, so first gear is just spinning tires. That's fantastic. So the CTS-V Coupe here runs the LSA supercharged 6.2 liter V8 engine. It does 556 horsepower, 551 pound-feet of torque, and it does 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds. So I mean, very, very impressive numbers. I mean, that's, you know, still very impressive considering, you know, the current CTS-Vs and stuff. I mean, they're a little faster, but you know, this is very, very impressive performance, and lots and lots of power. I mean, it's such a meaty amount of torque too, because, you know, you're talking about an engine that's the same size as the Dodge Challenger Hellcats and Charger Hellcats. Same kind of, you know, engine displacement. Obviously, it's a different supercharger setup and a completely different engine and stuff, but that's the type of muscle you're dealing with here. Obviously, not quite as aggressive with this tune versus the 700 horsepower you get in those, but it's a similar amount of torque as far as, you know, how you really feel like it pushes you back into your seat very, very nicely. And whew, feels great. But it's a good thing I had the traction control in its more lenient setting, because if I were to have done that, you know, with everything still on, I'm sure first gear would have killed the fun a little bit. I'll try that out in a second and see how it does. It just has so much punch in those lower RPMs. That's the great thing with these supercharged engines is, you know, even though the red line on this is just over 6,000 RPMs, obviously it's not a rever, so you just, have tons of punch in those lower RPMs. So even whenever you're just cruising around at, low speeds here, all you need is a little twitch at your right foot and you immediately have a surge forward. So now I'm on a back road here, and one thing that you might be able to notice is that there's a good amount of drone around 2,000 RPMs with this muffler delete. So that is something to keep in mind if you're considering doing a muffler delete for yourself, is that you do have a little bit of drone there. But obviously, if you get out of that 2,000 RPM range, then it's good. So you just want to make sure that you're not hovering at 2,000 RPMs in whatever gear you're in. But now we're on a back road here, and I still have the suspension in its touring mode. And these are some tighter corners here, and I can feel a little bit of the lean whenever I'm kind of pushing it a little bit more. But it still just actually drives really nice even in the touring mode here. So grip is pretty good too. We got 255 wide tires in the front, 285s in the rear, so nice staggered setup, and they're Continental Extreme Contact Sport tires. So these originally came with Michelin Pilot Sport 2s back whenever those were the best tire in 2011. I really just love driving this car. It's just so comfortable and relaxing while still just having so much power. I love the low end torque that you have in this, and it's also a joy to use this manual transmission. The automatic that I reviewed in the last CTSV that I reviewed, the second gen version here, that sedan that was an automatic, that I was disappointed with the automatic, even for 2011 and 2013 standards. Whenever I was reviewing that, it still just was a little slow even back then. Now with how much transmissions have improved, especially automatics, this I think is the way to go with a manual transmission in these. The automatic, is fine if you just want to cruise around or you always want to just leave an auto, but if you ever want to do your own shifting, definitely get this manual. It is fantastic. It's so easy to rev match your downshifts, and it's such a nice manual to use. I mean, very predictable. I'm going to go ahead and put the suspension into its sport mode. We've got a couple of tight little corners here, see if we can feel any kind of significant difference. And yeah, okay, so I did feel a tiny bit of roll in the touring mode, but in this here, feels good and flat. No issues there whatsoever. But honestly, I'm impressed. Even in the sport mode here, the couple of bumps I just went over, it still doesn't feel very firm. It doesn't feel uncomfortable. So honestly, both modes are great. There's not a wild difference between the two of them, but I think that's good, because if you just want a little bit better performance, you can drive around in sport mode all the time, really, if you want. And if you just, want to be comfortable and relaxed and still have pretty good handling, you just leave it in touring mode. But I'm going to do another acceleration this time with the traction control on, see how it does. Okay, so it lights up the traction control, but it doesn't hold it back, so that's pretty nice. Sorry about my GoPro going off there for a split second, but yeah, so very good amount of power there, and yeah, you don't have to drive the traction control off in order to get all that fun. You still can get it. It just lights up the traction control light a little bit, but it still is a lot of fun. But we'll do slow down a little bit here and do a rolling start from like 2,500 RPMs in third gear. It's almost immediate, and then it just pulls like a freight train. Oh, I love the sound of this thing too. I really do wish there was more supercharger whine though. I swear I heard more supercharger whine in the previous CTSV. It is so muted, and the owner of this one actually did take off the engine cover too, so you have even less sound deadening there than you usually would. But yeah, so that's something I think you could probably mess with it in the aftermarket to make it a little bit louder, because that would add to the experience. As much as I enjoy this V8 sound, with a loud supercharger like when you go with the Hellcats and stuff, that would be the best of both worlds in my opinion. So that's the only thing I think could be improved on with this. Otherwise, it's just fantastic. Then we can go ahead and put it back into the tour mode. And it actually is a little bit more extreme, even since you have that little bit of a softer suspension setup. If you do stomp on it, you feel the nose lift up a little bit more, and then it kind of dives down a little bit more aggressively. So that gives you a little bit more excitement if you prefer that. You don't need to have the sharpest handling. Then you can just leave it in tour mode, and then you have even more drama there. But now just cruising on a main road here, we can go ahead and go up into fifth and just kind of cruise, and it's very comfortable and relaxing. Like I said, the only thing is you do get some exhaust drone right around 2,000 RPM, so you got to be careful with where you're cruising at, what speeds you're at, what gear you're at. But otherwise, fantastic. Absolutely love the CTS-V here. So huge thanks to Dakota once again for offering his very pristine, this one only has about 40,000 miles on CTS-V coupe to review for you guys today. I definitely wanted to do this manual. I wanted to do the coupe because I think the coupe has really got some cool styling, and you have the fantastic transmission to go with it. It's just a really great combo, and I can see why he loves this car so much. So anyway, let me know your thoughts on the CTS-V coupe in the comments below. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.